Hello and welcome to MTG Money. I'm Matt, your host and owner of EC Hipstar Games in Sub-Zero, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. So we're on episode 5, and that means we're contractually obligated to touch on the reserve list. So this week we're going to take a look at the reserve list, and then we're going to do a little check-in with that PSA 10 Black Lotus that sold a couple weeks ago. What the reserve list is a list of cards that Wizards stated back in 1996 that they would never reprint in tournament legal form. This is at the outcry of players after Chronicles and 4th edition were printed, which really brought down prices at the time, and players were concerned about the value of their collections dropping. Since then, Wizards has revised the list a couple of times for such things as removing Demonic Tutor from the list, thank goodness, and reprinting Phyrexian Negator in foil, which was a pretty poorly received reprint at the time. So what's the big problem with the reserve list? One thing to keep in mind is that the list was created when the game was only 3 years old, and that's been 25 years ago at this point. So as new players have joined the game, there's been more demand for the cards that are on the list. Key cards, obviously, are the dual lands that come up almost all the time in the conversation. And there's also this tension on the other side with players who have already bought into these cards probably not wanting the value of their cards to go down. Even right now, dual lands, even the cheapest ones, tend to be $200, $300, $400, and that's a sizable investment that if Wizards open the floodgates on tomorrow, players would not be happy about their $400 card going to $50 or something. However, we do have to keep in mind that Wizards is a corporate company owned by Hasbro, so they are in the business of making profit, and in that sense, we need to ask what's really stopping them from cashing in. And the answer to that is something called promissory estoppel, and what that is essentially the idea, legally, that Wizards made a promise back in 1996 not to reprint these cards, and they are legally bound by that in a financial sense, so if they do choose to reprint cards off the reserve list, they will most likely be facing some sort of a lawsuit. And that lawsuit will probably come in the form of players holding the higher-end reserve list cards, trying to prove financial damages from the reprinting of any cards from the list. That being said, Wizards has something that we see in master sets or any reprint set called reprint equity. Something to think about is like Mana Crypt or what used to be Tarmogoyf when that was a $150, $200 card. And they use these cards to kind of showcase the set and be the chase card. So, like recently, we had Double Masters where Mana Crypt, which at the time was over $100 still, was kind of the chase card. These chase cards really drive players to open packs and boxes, knowing that they might be able to pull a $100+ card out of the pack or box that they're opening. And that brings us back to the reserved list, which, in a sense, Wizards is sitting on thousands of dollars in reprint equity that they're not using in the form of these cards that are on the list. And that brings us into a little more speculative section of the show, where I'm going to talk about what might happen with the list, because I have to assume that at some point, Wizards or Hasbro is going to see how much money they've got essentially laying on the table that they're not taking advantage of, and I assume at some point they're going to break through this promise that they made. But what I think they could do is I think they've got a few options for reprinting cards off the reserve list. One of these reprint avenues is obviously Secret Lairs, as Wizards has gotten the message loud and clear that they can sell singles directly to players. I think the big roadblock on this one, actually, is the price tag that you would have to put on any Secret Lair that would have boxes or a Black Lotus, obviously, but even the dual lands, which I think is really what players are seeking, because that's going to be the most playable cards for Commander decks. Another option might be something like the Vintage Masters product that's available on Magic Online. Another issue with this is the price tag that it would have including those high-end cards, although they might be able to defer that price by including older cards from like Tempest back or anything of that nature, and just seeding in the higher end cards as some kind of like possible ultra mythic, and they could maybe make 4, 5, 6 sets out of including these reserved list cards along with other older cards. And then one final idea, and my preferred method of doing it, which is what I would honestly love to see, is them seeding the cards in normal standard packs. I think it'd be awesome if maybe there were 10 Black Lotuses in the upcoming Strixhaven product. And this is something that they could hypothetically, keep going for years if they're only introducing 10 of a Power 9 every standard set. That's 40 throughout the year. I think it'd be a very interesting way of increasing supply while most likely not even touching the financial value of those old cards, which might actually save them from a lawsuit. I'm definitely not a lawyer though, so don't take my word on that one at all. If they did choose this route, one other thing I would just love to see is some kind of unique redemption code, possibly linked to a database, so you could be able to tell that these extremely high-end cards are not counterfeited, which is something we do run into with a lot of the older cards. And there's obviously ways to check that out, and I could do another video on that if there is interest. But I think if we're going to be reprinting of extreme high value like that, I really think we should have a way that's verified by Wizards to avoid counterfeiting. For my final thoughts on the subject, Wizards has clearly determined that acknowledging the secondary market can be highly beneficial for them financially. It would also answer the outcry of many players looking for reserved list cards, much like the dual lands, and I think it's only a matter of time before Wizards breaks this promise, goes ahead and reaps the benefits financially, and just assumes that the money they're going to make off selling more product is going to outweigh the cost of the impending lawsuit. While I don't expect this to hurt the prices of ultra-playable cards, some of the cards that are carrying a high price only due to scarcity, such as like Didgeridoo, for example, I would expect a possible reprint of the reserved list cards to affect those quite a bit. So if you're looking to get into any reserved list cards, I would really try to get into those ultra-playable staples. So with all that said, let's kind of switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about the PSA 10 Black Lotus that sold recently. So as I'm sure you know, if you were following along, that PSA 10 Black Lotus with the case signed by Christopher Rush sold for $511,100. And while it didn't quite ignite the Magic market the way the PSA 10 Charizard did back in the fall, I think this really legitimizes Magic cards, especially on the high end, as a possible investment-grade asset. And we're seeing this kind of in a lot of areas. Pokemon cards, obviously, but even a lot of sports cards are going right around the $1 million or more dollar amount. And I think Magic getting above this $500,000 point is really going to be a net benefit for the game. And finally, I know on the last episode I promised a Kaldheim set review of sorts with my buddy and casual expert Joe. Unfortunately, there were some technical details on my end, and we made the recording, but it didn't quite work out. So hopefully we're going to be back with Strixhaven, and we'll do the same thing, or Time Spiral Remastered. Because it was a lot of fun to make, and I'm really sorry you guys didn't get a chance to see it. So that's all for me this week. If you like the show, please like it, subscribe it, share it on all your various social medias, and I will see you here next week where we talk about various buy list methods.